Iran just threatened to shut down one of the most important waterways on the entire planet. And if they follow through, the entire world feels it. This is not a story buried in the back of a newspaper. This is a direct threat from a senior government official that could reshape global energy markets, spike prices in every country on Earth, and push the United States and Iran closer to open conflict than they have been in decades. Stay with me, because this one matters. Let's start with the basics. The Strait of Hormuz is a narrow stretch of water located between Iran to the north and Oman to the south. At its narrowest point, it is only 21 miles wide. To put that in perspective, that is roughly the same distance as driving from one side of a major city to the other. A tiny stretch of water. But what passes through it every single day is anything but small. Nearly 20% of the world's entire oil supply moves through the Strait of Hormuz daily. We are talking about approximately 17 million barrels of oil every single day. That oil is headed to Europe, Asia, the United States, and dozens of other countries that depend on it to keep their economies running. Factories, power plants, transportation networks, heating systems. All of it connected to that one narrow corridor of water. And Iran sits right at the edge of it. Iran has always known that the Strait of Hormuz is its most powerful bargaining chip. For decades, whenever tensions between Iran and the West have escalated, the threat of closing the strait has loomed in the background. But what happened recently is different. This is not a vague warning from a low-level official. Iran's parliament speaker issued a direct and public statement saying that the Strait of Hormuz will not remain open if the United States continues its blockade on Iran. That is as serious as it gets. So what is the U.S. blockade they are talking about? The United States has maintained heavy economic sanctions on Iran for years. These sanctions are designed to cut Iran off from global financial systems, restrict its ability to export oil, and pressure the Iranian government into negotiations over its nuclear program and regional military activities. The sanctions have devastated the Iranian economy. Inflation in Iran has been brutal. Ordinary Iranian citizens have felt the impact in a very real and painful way. And Iran's government has grown increasingly frustrated with what it sees as economic warfare being waged against its people. The parliament speaker's warning is essentially Iran saying enough is enough. If the United States continues to strangle Iran economically, Iran will use the one tool it has that can inflict pain on the entire world: closing the strait. Now let's talk about what actually happens if Iran closes the Strait of Hormuz. Because the consequences would be felt almost immediately and they would be severe. The first and most obvious impact is oil prices. When the supply of oil is suddenly restricted, prices spike. We saw a version of this during past conflicts and disruptions in the Middle East. But a full closure of the Strait of Hormuz would be on a completely different scale. Analysts have estimated that in a worst-case scenario, oil prices could double or even triple within days of a closure. That means gas prices at the pump going through the roof almost overnight. In the United States, Europe, and across Asia, ordinary people would feel this at every single gas station. But it does not stop at gas prices. Oil is the foundation of the global economy. When oil prices spike, the cost of producing and transporting goods rises. That means higher prices for food, for electronics, for clothing, for basically everything that gets manufactured or shipped anywhere in the world. Inflation, which has already been a major issue for many countries over the past few years, would get significantly worse. Central banks would be under enormous pressure. Stock markets would likely react badly. The economic ripple effects would spread across every corner of the planet. Countries in Asia would be hit especially hard. Japan, South Korea, China, and India all depend heavily on oil imports that flow through the Strait of Hormuz. A closure would force these countries to scramble for alternative supplies that simply do not exist in the same volume or at the same price. The pressure on their economies would be immense. Europe would face a similar crisis. While Europe has been working to diversify its energy sources, particularly after the conflict in Ukraine disrupted Russian energy supplies, a Hormuz closure would create a new and massive shock to European energy markets at the worst possible time. And then there is the military dimension. The United States Navy has a significant presence in the Persian Gulf and the surrounding waters. If Iran moves to physically block the strait, the question of how the U.S. responds militarily becomes unavoidable. The U.S. has consistently stated that it will not allow the Strait of Hormuz to be closed. That is a long-standing policy commitment. But turning that policy into action in the face of an Iranian blockade would mean direct military confrontation between the US and Iran. That is a scenario that nobody wants to see play out. A direct military conflict between the United States and Iran in the Persian Gulf would be unpredictable, dangerous, and potentially catastrophic. It would draw in other regional powers. It would create chaos in global energy markets. And it would put thousands of military personnel in immediate danger. Iran knows all of this. And that is exactly why the threat carries so much weight. Iran is not necessarily saying it wants a war. What Iran is doing is making it very clear that it has the ability to cause enormous pain to the global economy and that it is willing to at least threaten to use that ability if the pressure on it does not ease. This is a high-stakes game of geopolitical chicken. And right now both sides are accelerating toward each other. What happens next depends on a lot of factors. Will the United States ease any of the sanctions in response to the threat? Probably not in the short term, because doing so would look like a capitulation to pressure and would undermine the entire sanctions strategy. Will Iran actually move to close the strait, or is this a negotiating tactic designed to bring the US to the table? That is the question that analysts and governments around the world are asking right now. What is clear is that the situation is volatile. The window for diplomatic de-escalation exists, but it is narrowing. And the consequences of getting this wrong are enormous, not just for Iran and the United States, but for every country on Earth that depends on the flow of oil through that 21-mile stretch of water. Most people scrolling through their phones right now have no idea this is even happening. The story is not getting the attention it deserves. But the decisions being made in Washington and Tehran in the coming days and weeks could affect gas prices in your city, the cost of groceries at your local store, and the stability of the global economy in ways that are very real and very immediate. This is the kind of story that starts as a headline and ends up changing the world. Stay informed. Follow for daily coverage of the stories that actually matter. Because while most of the noise out there is designed to distract you, this one is worth paying attention to.